I'm Donna Patton. I'm here with Pastor Josh, and you are listening to Jesus-Centric Leadership. Faith over fear is something we heard a lot during COVID.
We did.
I think we talked about it a lot.
Yeah.
I've seen tattoos about faith over fear, and my daughter-in-law has a sticker on her water bottle, faith over fear, which is why we brought it up. We wanted to talk a little bit about that today. So faith over fear. Fear is a word I have heard is used like, it's 365 times in the Bible, one
like
for
fear
each
not,
day.
Yeah,
is that? But you said that's not true.
Yeah, I was looking into it because I wanted to know, like for the podcast, I was like, well, how many times is it actually used? And probably in the Bible, do not be afraid is used 70 times, which is still a lot, but not 365. And I listened to some guy that broke it down all the times that like we could assume that he's saying do not fear, and it's maybe at the most, if you really stretch it, like 200. But again, saying something 70 times in the Bible is still a really big deal, but not 365.
I feel like this should be a Mythbusters episode, right? Like, where did that come from? Do you have any idea? Because I've heard it a ton.
Yeah, my guess is somebody stretched the truth to make a point. Like, I think that's sometimes what we do as Christians. Like, we think, well, I've got to make the Word of God cuter than it is so that I can, and it's like, I don't know that we need to do that. I think God's telling us one time is enough. Like if the Bible says something one time, that's enough. If it says it, 70 times, then it's a really, really big deal.
Right. I always say when God repeats himself, you have to listen. And 70 is enough.
70 is a lot.
We don't need 365. I've got 70.
And 70 is a pretty good number too. 7 days in a week times 10 weeks. Like that's a lot. Like that's a big deal.
So what is the reality of faith over fear? Like it can become a meme or a nicety that we read, but the truth is there's a lot of heart in that statement.
Yeah, and I think at the start, like we can take it kind of law heavy that like this is what you have to do. You have to choose to believe God over being fearful. You have to choose to dwell in the reality of what God says over the reality of what the world says. And I think that's really the big, I don't know, if you're gonna own like this idea of faith over fear, it's not just a nicety, it really is a choice that every day I'm gonna choose to deal on God's promises more than the world. Because I think the world does seek to add fear in our life, does seek to kind of cripple us with that. But God says, do not fear.
Yeah,
and that's a command, right? It's not at one level, it's not an invitation, it's a command.
Right. It's not a, hey, if you're having a bad day. It's, I need you here.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is? Why does God need us to not carry this spirit of fear? Because I can become fearful. I'm an overthinker, and that's right where we can go, is to fear. So why is God so adamant in a sense of, I don't want you to camp in fear?
I think it has to do with where the hope is, right? If we're gonna leave fear behind, we've got to have hope. Like the hope has to be greater than the fear, right? Like if I have a conference coming up, and I'm quite honestly, I'll be vulnerable for a minute. Like I'm fearful to go to a conference because I'm fearful to go places without Sarah. Like I don't like flying without her. I don't like meeting new people. Like I do it okay at church, but like meeting new people outside of church where I'm comfortable, like, and it's easy for me to like be filled with fear. Like what if people don't like me? I know this sounds childish, right? Like what if people don't like me?
I think it's transparent, so thank you.
What if I don't relate well? What if I get stuck in the airport, right? It's easy to go to that, but the reality is like, I prayed if I should go to this conference or not, and now I get to step into it trusting that God can use it for good, trusting, because I could back out and not go, and nobody would probably miss me and I'd be fine, right? But like God has called us to have the hope that he can work through things. And I know that's like, it's silly to use a conference for an example of that, because like we can be fearful about work or about our kids or about the election or about, but who are we going to, Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I don't think that's silly at all. I think, again, it's being honest and transparent. You're a person, and you're a real person who has real fears. And I think sometimes we look at leaders and go, well, not them. But the truth is, I think we all have some core things. Yeah. And for me, I've got fears. I've got a lot of fears. I'm afraid of abandoned buildings. I don't know if you knew that. I can't even look like in a King Soopers if it's been abandoned. I can't even go to the window and look in. There's this thing in my stomach, and I don't know why, but it's just the way it is. But I think we all have those, and it's recognizing that when we put our hope, in God. Hope is a positive assurance of things to come. Yeah. I once heard that defined that way. And when we understand that God has a greater picture for us, that's where faith can defeat that fear. Yeah. And I think fear is a tool that Satan can really use in my own life to cause me to miss some things. And one of them is God's goodness. Yeah. When I get so consumed in fear, I take my eyes off of the ball, in a sense, of faith, and where God's working and what He has happening for me and for the people around me.
Yeah. 1 John 4:18 says, there is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. For fear has to do with punishment, and whoever fears has not been perfected in love. But I like that start. There's no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. And I think what John is referring to there is the fact that when we know Christ loved us, when we know that Christ went to the ends of the earth, that He died on the cross for us, that's perfect love. And when we know we have a God who's all powerful, all loving, like, what do we have to fear? Like, what can the election take out of me? What can this trip that I'm going on take from me? What can anything in this life take from me if I have a God who loves me and promises eternal rest with Him? Right now, things can happen, things can go wrong, but at the end of the day, nothing can actually shake me to my core, because my core is found in Jesus Christ who loved me, right? And that's I think why we have to choose to have faith over fear. It's not like, I'm going to buckle up and put aside fear. It's not that. It's that I'm going to buckle up and focus on Jesus, right? That I'm going to remind myself in the midst of fear, I'm going to remind myself to go to Jesus. That's the action. It's not overcome fear, but it's to lean into Jesus and let His perfect love do that.
Yeah, and to realize that can cover that moment or that fear or that... Yeah, all of it. Yeah, and I tease about, like, I may never overcome my fear of abandoned buildings, but I think through the hard in my life, one of the fears that I have is being alone. So, when you plan your life with someone else and you believe that that's where God's going to take that, and it shifts, then my fear went to being alone. And God's really used some people in my life to speak the truth. That, like my son says, Mom, you're the least alone person I know. I don't believe that's going to be your story. But if I focus on the negativity of the fear, and I can really get consumed of that. And but when I look at God's promises, I will never leave you, I will never forsake you, and I do lean into that, then I do see the blessings that He has for me of other people and of the community and the family that I've been blessed with. And I can move away from that fear with assurance that God has me.
The 23rd Psalm, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. But again, like, you got to look at the context of the 23rd Psalm. Like, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Then it says a few things that He's with you in. He's with you in the valley of the shadow of death. Like, that doesn't sound pleasant. He's with you when He prepares a table in the presence of your enemies.
Yeah, I don't like that part.
Right? You're having dinner with the people you hate, like your least favorite people, and yet God is with you. Like, He's saying you fear not. Why? And why do we fear not? Well, ultimately, fear not because you have the ability to make friends, or you have the ability not to be alone, but you ultimately fear because God's going to give you what you need.
Right, and your rod and your staff, they comfort me.
Yeah.
And David, what a great visual, because he comes out from the part of a shepherd, right? And the rod and the staff didn't always look comforting, but that staff could yank those sheep out when they got in those thick bushes that had the stuff that caught him. You can tell I'm a sheep expert. But
brambles.
Right. And it also moves them along so they don't get stuck in the valley. And that is comfort, to know that God is going to yank me when I get in the thick of it. Or he's going to push me along when I need it, when I'm focusing on his goodness and I put my hope in him.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely true. And the other one, these are actually Jesus' words from John 14:27. Lots of Bible verses for you guys today. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled. Do not be afraid. Now, it's easy to just read that by itself, but this is happening between Jesus washing the disciples' feet on Thursday and him dying on Friday. This is it goes from chapter 13 to 18. It's this long, almost sermon that Jesus preaches just to his disciples, and he does that right before probably the hardest thing in their life, right?
And his.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing. It's definitely hard for him, but I think he's focused so much on them that when they're getting ready to go into hard, he's telling them not to be afraid, that I'm going to leave you, that I'm going to leave you with my peace. I'm not going to abandon you, even though he is. He's going to, for all intents and purposes, he's going to leave them, die on the cross, be put in a tomb. They're going to be kind of an enemy of the state here for a bit. They're going through a hard time, but he's saying, hey, you can choose fear in this moment, or you can remember that I'm with you, that I've got this.
Yeah, and I love that so much, because he's not belittling, he's not being sarcastic, he's not minimizing their fear. I mean, he could. He could be like, guys, I'm the Son of God, get over it, move on. We've got bigger things to do here. But instead, he loves them so well by speaking into that fear. And I think that's what we're trying to talk about here, is we as leaders get the privilege to speak that truth into people. And we're not minimizing fear. We're not saying, oh, this is an easy thing. If you just read God's word, your fear should go away. It's not a magic thing. It's faith. It's trusting where God's going to go and what he can even do with that fear.
Yeah, and I think even that, we see it in the disciples, Jesus didn't give up on Peter when he feared. Peter feared, and he let his fear cause him to deny Jesus, right? And Jesus didn't give up on him. And so I think even when we fall into that, we give way to fear, we let fear overtake us for a season or for a day or for an hour or for a moment, Jesus has that grace for us. He's not gonna abandon you just because you're fearful. And I think that's, the grace that we get to walk in, that even though I might be filled with fear, Jesus still loves me.
So taking it back to Jesus-centric leadership, we looked at how Jesus saw fear and how he spoke into fear, and how God really wants us to put our hope and our trust in him. Why is this important to us as leaders? Not only as we look at our own fear, but the people who we lead, acknowledging, and especially, I hate to say this again, this will probably drop after election season, but I think fear's going to carry us for a while no matter what. What do we do with that as leaders, and what is your challenge for us?
Yeah, I think, you can go back and read Non-Anxious Presence. I think some of that, we won't go as deep into that, but I would just simply say, as a leader, speak from what you know, not always what you feel. So during COVID, there was times I was very fearful, right? I remember, vulnerably crying in the corner in my office because I was very fearful of how do we do this, right? But then when I get up in front of people, I speak not for myself. I'm not someone that just hides everything. I tell you guys a lot what's going on, but at the same level, I'm going to speak from you, not from my insecurity, because that could have been some Sundays. It could have been, the sky's falling, the world is changing, how do we do this? But you don't speak from that. You speak from what you know to be true about God. And I think even if you're in a secular space or a secular leader, like you can still speak from that confidence and hope. And you may never see God, but that you can speak from the confidence of, no, I think things are going to turn out all right. And the reason behind that, I think things are going to turn out all right. The reason you can say that is because you know who's in charge. You know who's in control. You know who's the boss of all things, and that's God, right? Like as we're listening to this, whoever run the election doesn't matter. God's still reigning on the throne, right? He's still in charge, right? This is his world. And so I get to really lead from a place of that given, of who's ultimately in charge. And then speak out of that. If we believe it, speak it. Speak it until you believe it yourself.
Amen.
Speak it for the sake of others until you believe it yourself,
Amen.
right? Like,
and claim that.
Yeah.
Yes. I think in my heart, it was, I shared with my son, I'm claiming every truth I've taught, every truth that was taught to me, every truth that God speaks to me in his word. Even when I'm struggling, I'm holding on with both hands. And that's the best place I can be, is in his truth. I also think a little bit about, we have a friend of ours who is helping us do some work on the worship center a couple of weeks ago, and they and their spouse are going through some hard. And it was with a diagnosis. And they said this, Donna, I believe that to defeat the hard, sometimes we just have to wage full-on battle with Satan. And I'm like, wow.
Let's go.
Yeah, full-on battle. And they said, because we just have to stand in the truth and to think of it as a battle. And I do believe that. I believe sometimes fear can be a battle, but Satan doesn't win. You went through a period, I think it was through COVID, and Jesus wins. And I remember one message that you shared, you must have said 10 times, and Jesus wins. And Jesus wins. And I think when we are almost being overtaken with fear, we have to remember that, and Jesus wins. In this battle, it's not going to be fear that wins. It's going to be Jesus.
The Ephesians 6:12, the battle is not against flesh and blood, right? We're not battling our coworkers, our family, our friends, our enemies, the people in the world. We're not valuing that. We're not battling that. We're ultimately battling against Satan. And so let's call it what it is. Fear is from the devil. Fear is from Satan. And let's call it what it is, and then remind ourselves that Jesus wins. And I did that 10 times because you're probably going to have to do that 10 times 10 or 100 times 10. And you're going to have to say that in your life every day that, this is hard right now. Don't deny that it's hard. Don't deny that it's easy for me to be fearful right now, but Jesus wins.
And to remind each other of that, I think that's what we get to do in leadership also, is the people that we're leading, remind them of that in love. No one needs, if you have more faith, you wouldn't be afraid. Maybe it's not about that in that moment. Some of the niceties, that's not a very nicety, but some of the niceties that I think sometimes we say are the little snippets we don't understand is not helpful. It's not loving. But to do it in love, maybe to be vulnerable with your own fear and where you've seen God speak into that, or how you've held on to truth. But remember to tell somebody they need more faith isn't going to get them where they need to go.
No, I would generally say if you're telling people faith over fear, right, probably not a good thing to be telling people all the time. Great model to live your life by. Great question to ask in my leadership. Am I embodying faith over fear? But I think if you work it down to the cliche that I'm just saying it, it's just a cliche. But if you're living it out, I think it's a really great phrase to live out.
And that conversation can even be when someone's sharing that deep fear, I hear you. And here's how I've met some fear in my life. And it's a great segue rather than you need to get over it.
I think you invite them into that reality and model it in your life. Right, like as opposed to calling them out for fear.
Wow, what a great discussion. And so, what's your shallow fear? Like, I'm afraid of abandoned buildings. What's
needles?
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, remember when
that.
I gave blood with you guys during COVID? And I won. We had a competition who could get their pint done first, and I won because I was so nervous. The heart's just going. So yeah.
Way
needles.
to face that fear.
Yeah,
I remember that.
Yeah.
That was a moment. Well, thank you guys. Thanks for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again on our next Jesus-Centric Leadership.